Good afternoon. Welcome. Day before Thanksgiving. Happy holidays. I'm here with Mark Duclos, SIOR past president. Mark, thanks for joining me on ONWARD.
Great to be here, Curt. Thank you.
Excellent. So listen, we wanted to hit on, sort of your experience. It's been quite a journey. You took over for the presidency in October of 2019 of the SIOR Global organization. What did that look like?
Oh boy, it was seems like 10 years ago. It was only just over 2 years ago. But yeah, listen, when we took over as president of SIOR Global, I was ready to do what everybody else did before me, which is basically pack your bags and get ready to hit the road and start spreading the good word of SIOR and what we're all about, and be a great steward for the organization. And so that entailed just like I said, hitting the road and as I always call it, shaking hands and kissing babies.
Yeah, and certainly I remember that time. You basically were planning 60% of the time on the road and 40% back here in Hartford, and I know that started in October. And then, as we know, fast forward a few months, we hit 2020. You got January, you're gone a lot. February, you're gone a lot. March, you're gone a couple of weeks, and then boom. What did that look like?
Yeah. Well, listen, March 15th, 2020, 2020. Again, it seems like it was about 10 years ago, but March 15th, 2020, the world stopped, right? And so did SIOR, at least temporarily. I think you take a step back, and just as we all did with the organization and our companies, you sat there and in our careers, we all sat back and said, oh my goodness, what does this look like? And frankly, the answers were not good for a few weeks. Everybody thought that the worst, quite candidly, and that's no different with SIOR. Of course, then you kind of take a step back and you regroup and you say, okay, well, what's next? Because there will be a tomorrow. And listen, there's no secret. When I've been out there in the last 6 months speaking publicly, we needed to do a gut check. And we not only needed to do a gut check of what we were as an organization, but the people that we had at SIOR. The first gut check was the people. And when everybody checked in, we were figured out we were probably pretty good. We were doing all right with the people. But as an organization, we learned that we weren't ready for the COVID world, right? Everybody locked down. We were an organization that was used to relationships, to in-person events, and that's how we got our relationships. It was by no means online. It was by no means virtual. So we basically knew that we had a half-full toolbox of tools, and as I put it, the tools that were in that toolbox we could not use. And so kind of had to take a step back and say, all right, well, where do we want to be? We're locked down as a country. We're locked down as an organization. Where do we want to be in the next 6 months? And so we took a look at that and we decided, you know what, we need to change. And people use the word pivot. I wouldn't say pivot, because pivot means pivot means you become something that you probably weren't or you're not supposed to be. But we took a look and we said, okay, well, what's our mission? And again, we always thought the mission was relationships, but it's not. We learned quickly that our mission is very simple. Our mission is about connecting, and it's connecting people to knowledge, people to markets, and people to opportunities. We were replacing connecting with relationships, but relationships are a product of connecting. And so we made sure and we committed ourselves to filling the toolbox, the other half of the toolbox, with tools that were specifically related to connecting people to knowledge, people to markets, and people to opportunities. And we're blessed with a team in DC that was committed to doing that, and with members that were committed to doing that. And if you're going to use the word pivot to the virtual world. And it was great. And so we sit here just about 19, 20 months later, and we could say, you know what, that happened.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And obviously in our Zoom world, in which, we spent much of 2020 in, and like you said, it enabled you to do a refocus where you were able to look at those kinds of things that were lacking, or how the organization structurally was working. So obviously, the COVID world, was very difficult. And, but I think, organizations and companies across, the United States and in the world learned a different way to do business. And it sounds like you were able to affect a lot of change and really understand the dynamics of the organization.
Listen, yeah. So part of being a SIOR president, you've already had 3 years under your belt, being on the board of directors and part of the executive team, what we call governance. And so the leaders before me were wonderful leaders, and you got a pretty good idea of what the organization's all about and the people that you have in the organization. I think the one thing that we just really didn't take into account during those years was the other tools, as I call it, the other tools that were at our that we could use. And some of those tools are become new, right? So the Zooms of the world, right? The Zooms of the world were around before COVID, but nobody really looked at that as, and they improved, by the way, but drastically during COVID. But nobody really looked at those as viable tools to run your organization or your company. And those obviously have become part of our toolbox. And we think that's going to be part of our toolbox for years to come.
Yeah, I think you're right. I remember at that time, March, April, Zoom had in that time, I think 16,000 Zooms, and that quickly cranked up to up over 400,000. So you think about the magnitude of the people getting together and trying to collaborate via Zoom. Super significant.
100%.
So you're now racing through the market, working on all the underlying things and plugging along, and it comes up to October, which would normally be the time to hand the baton over. So, and that didn't happen. So for the first time in SIOR history, they asked yourself as president and the management team to stay on. You know, what was the premise there, and how did that shape up for the last year?
Yeah. So I had a few board members come up to me prior to that decision asking me if I was willing to stick around for another year of that kind of fun, quote unquote. And of course, that wasn't just me. That affected everybody in our leadership team and everybody, frankly, at the SIOR Global level for volunteer leadership. And so you had to take a step back and make sure that everybody else was willing, because this isn't just about the SIOR president. It's about the SIOR leadership. Fortunately, we got resounding yeses right across the board. So officially, right when the next board meeting, the board asked us officially, and we said, sure, let's do it. And so I think the board looked and said, listen, this is at the time, and I believe that decision was made, I'm going to call it third quarter of 2020. I think they looked at SIOR as obviously being still in a very volatile time. I think that we felt that we righted the ship, and that doesn't mean the ship wasn't headed in the right direction pre-COVID, but certainly when COVID hit, the ship took a couple of, got a little topsy-turvy, right? And so we righted that ship, and I think they felt that it was in the best interest of SIOR to keep the leadership team on board. In addition to that, we're going through a transition for our C-suite, right? So we knew we were transitioning out of our present CEO, and we were in a new CEO search, which then also became a new COO search. And so it was nice to be able to be in that position, to be able to see that through as well. And as we came out of it in January of 2021, we had a new CEO with Robert Thornburg, our immediate past president, actually, and then Brandon Hensley, who came in and took over the COO position. So those two now, as I left in Nashville just a few weeks ago, those were firmly in place and firmly leading SIOR and the direction that we're headed, which we think is pretty positive.
Wow, that sounds like a lot of work. So, in any event, so when you look back at it, and you mentioned some points there that were very, very large in scale. When you look back, what do you think the imprint is that you, as past president, feel that you left on the organization, and then obviously, from a board perspective, how did you leave the organization?
I think one of the things that first I want to say, listen, it's about us. And I don't mean that just, it's about us. I really do believe it's a global organization. It's global leadership. We're not doing the things that we're doing just because Mark Duclos decided to do them. Everybody decided to pull in the same direction, to refocus and do the things we did. And that's from the team in DC all the way through to global leadership, through chapter leadership. If you look at the imprint, I think one of the things COVID did in not only at SIOR, and I can say frankly at Sentry Commercial, is you get rid of the white noise. There was a lot of noise out there before COVID, right? We all kind of get into it. The markets were good. You're out there, you're doing things, and noise starts kind of pounding at you, and you start losing your way a little bit. And I don't mean that from a negative, because you're still a really good organization, still a really good company. But one of the things that when crisis like a pandemic comes up, you can get rid of that noise, and you're forced to get rid of that noise and become a much more focused organization. So whether it was because of our leadership or because just the fact we had pandemic, I'd like to think it was partly pandemic, it was partly leadership, that we were able to get rid of that noise and really reestablish our focus on who we were. I think that includes the mission of the president. I think in the mission of what we call the governance. So when the president goes out there, the president was doing things like the face of the organization, which the president should be, but things that the presidents weren't doing. And I don't mean that just previous presidency, but what we got away from was really a focus on the board of directors. I think the board of directors is one of the president's primary responsibilities, if not the primary responsibility. You know, the president is the chairman of the board, and to have an engaged board of directors is very important for any organization or any company. And I think we now leave after COVID, or we're not even after COVID yet, but as we leave COVID, we have an extremely focused board of directors. And by the way, you have a president who's very focused on handling the board of directors. So I think those are probably two major things that you take away, and maybe three, you know, the refocus of the president, the refocus of the board of directors, and getting rid of that white noise.
That's amazing. So, yeah. You know, one of the things I think about is your years of SIOR, and then your presidency, and I know you felt like it was time to give back, and so probably committing to that second year term, wasn't really a big deal for you in terms of how much you feel about the organization and what it's done for your career. So kind of on a personal note, how do you feel about where you started, the end of your journey here, and just kind of sum it up, closing thoughts as to what you're feeling now.
Yeah. Incredibly honored to lead the organization, more committed to the organization than I ever have been. The organization and the experience of presidency changed me as a person, not just as a leader, but as a person. I would say the real takeaways are, and I always knew the people of SIOR was what drove SIOR. And I guess this was a reaffirmation of that. When you're in good times, everybody's doing great, everybody's having fun, everybody's positive. But when you hit the tough times, as they say, that's when you really find out what the person's all about. And in this particular case, you couldn't have hit much rougher times. And what we really learned about the people of SIOR, the members, our team, our sponsors, our partners, was the positivity that they approached the challenge with, and just the strength that they had, the resilience that they had, and the care that they had for each other. It was astounding, and it was so reaffirming as a person. And not only just as a president of SIOR, but as a human being, to see that happen. I've always talked about the difference between the what and the who. The what of SIOR are the people in SIOR and what they do, right? So as members, strong brokers, been around for a long time, been very productive. And I've always said, but that's really not what SIOR is all about. What SIOR is all about is the who of SIOR. It's the human in SIOR, how good the people are, how good they are to each other, how they care for each other. And those things really came across so strong in the last 20 months that I'm just so proud of the organization and the people in it. And I really look forward. I think SIOR is at a great place, and I think it's in a great place for years to come. So again, could not have been more humbled to lead this organization. People will say, listen, apologize that you had to do it. You had to be the pandemic president or the COVID president, however you want to call it. And, I look back and say, I could not think of a better place to have been than be the president of SIOR during COVID. I was, again, honored to bring us to help bring us through, honored to have the leadership team we have, honored to have the people we had with us. And it's a double-edged sword. Listen, I'm ready to take a breath. That's no question. But the other side of that sword is I just had a ball, and it was because of the people.
That's awesome. So, one of the things with that is we're glad to have you back. So, it's a big commitment, and certainly you set up the company well to take advantage of your time away. And but it's good to be back, and I think it's a great segment here. Just wanted to share, with the organization and share out with our community and our clients and our friends. So, Mark Duclos, past president SIOR, president of Sentry Commercial, and I am Curt Gemme with Sentry Commercial, and this is our ONWARD series. So, Mark, thanks for joining us today, and we'll look forward to more of these kinds of things as we move forward.
Thanks for having me, Curt. I appreciate it. All right. Bye-bye, folks.
Bye.